Arizona empowerment scholarships using taxpayer dollars for equipment and activities that public school families would have to pay out of pocket for. While parents getting ESAs say they help provide equity in education, critics argue the program is actually creating a two-tier system. Here's ABC15 senior investigative reporter Melissa Blasius with the new data on what ESA dollars are buying.
A giant red spot.
Where is that red spot?
7-year-old Rowan Woodard and his friends homeschool together.
How many are there?
127.
Not all children fit within the box of public education.
Rowan has autism and other disabilities.
He had been kicked out of a couple schools. They couldn't accommodate his needs.
Rowan's mom, Leela, signed up for an empowerment scholarship account, money she mostly spends on tutors and classroom supplies. For her, it's about equity, individualizing instruction to give her child the best opportunity to learn.
We're seeing a lot of people very happy with the program and how it's helping their children.
State law requires families to use a portion of their ESA monies for reading, grammar, math, social studies, and science, but the rest could be spent on anything educational.
The ABC15 investigators obtaining this state data showing $300 million worth of purchases using ESA money in the last year. It is a list so long it stretches all the way down this block. In front of the state education building, there are 14,000 vendors on this list, and ABC15 data analyst Garrett Archer spent weeks going through the list, categorizing the expenses.
And the vast majority of the spend was used on school tuition and also supplies, things like computers and books. But we did find about 10 to 12 million or so that were, I guess, used for things that you can consider educational extras.
We are doing our very best to ensure that families have the greatest amount of access to all educational opportunities.
Arizona's ESA director, John Ward, sat down with me to discuss allowable expenses and the approval process.
We've gotten a list from the Department of Treasury about expenses, and I did have some questions about a number of them. $50,000 on Universal Yum snacks.
So food is never allowable, an allowable expense in ESA. So you telling me that there's $50,000 being spent on this? I'm not sure what time period you're looking at.
While Ward is looking at how Yum made it through, we asked about another product to grow your own food. Trendy aeroponic indoor gardens, averaging $900 each.
Nearly $400,000 in tower gardens we've bought families. Is that an allowable expense today?
If a parent submitted a curriculum that said tower gardens were part of that curriculum to teach some type of science concept or something else, these would be allowable.
Among the $2 million in music expenses, we found some people buying pianos for their homes.
These are absolutely allowable. Now, if it was a luxury piano, some type of grand piano, baby grand, we may not approve that as a luxury item.
Not luxury pianos, but what about learning to drive in a luxury car? A Scottsdale company does that. ESA paid for 77 kids, averaging more than $800 each.
Should our tax dollars be going to a family so their kid can learn how to drive in a Tesla?
So while you may think this may not be a good use of that family's ESA funding, at the end of the day, they get a fixed amount of money. And if that's how they're going to choose to use it, that's their prerogative.
And their prerogative runs the gamut. Here's what ABC15 tallied. $3,400 spent on a single transaction at a golf store. A nearly $10,000 transaction at a sewing machine company. 34 purchases at a company that sells food freeze-drying appliances. More than 100 passes to the Snowball Ski Resort. More than $350,000 spent on Ninja Warrior training centers, trampoline parks, and climbing gyms, and more than $1.2 million on martial arts instruction.
The vast majority of purchases that are coming through are completely allowable.
I think we really have a right to know
what's happening here.
Beth Lewis with Save Our Schools has campaigned against ESAs, but ABC15's data analysis is the first time she's seeing aggregate numbers on what ESAs are paying for, and Lewis says this shows ESAs are not equitable.
It shows what a two-tiered system this is for haves and have-nots, right? Like the public school kids have no resources and are really, really struggling, and then these families can use vouchers to pay for jujitsu, while the rest of us pay out of pocket.
She says taxpayers and voters will question whether ESAs are wasteful.
They do not want to pay for a piano in everybody's living room when they can pay for a piano in a local high school that serves 400 kids a year for 20 years.
ESA Director Ward says they want to run the program as efficiently and effectively as possible.
At what point is there a reassessment to say, is this working or is this not working?
That's a policy question that the legislature and governor will answer.
Uranus.
Uranus is a gas planet, yes.
As for Rowan's mom, Leela Woodard, she hopes others see the value in his educational environment, even if universal vouchers have had a rocky start.
In our world, there are people that abuse everything, and it's a small percentage. The families that I've talked to, are all using it correctly, in my opinion, and doing amazing things.
We reached out to that driving school and the store that sold the most expensive piano on our list. Their company's emphasizing how these are state-approved educational expenses. Their customers have a variety of options at multiple price points, and they said that there is a lot of value in learning an instrument and learning to drive well. I'm investigator Melissa Blasius, ABC15, Arizona.
Ski passes, living room pianos, and trampoline parks. The ABC15 investigators are finding these are just some of the things taxpayers are footing the bill for kids enrolled in the state's voucher program. ABC15 senior investigative reporter Melissa Blasius talking to a member of the Parent Advisory Board for Arizona's Empowerment Scholarship Account Program on what he thinks state government leaders should do to improve accountability.
This parent gives credit to ESA administrators for catching up on a backlog of funding requests and trying to clarify the rules. But he says some more needs to be done to ensure the rapidly expanding program is in the best interest of Arizona kids and taxpayers.
Brian Hackbarth believes in the power of empowerment scholarships.
I think it's a good thing for Arizona.
Our state that consistently ranks near the bottom of all states for public education.
It is the right of the parents who makes the selection of where those kids go to school, how they're going to be taught, and what's going to be taught.
Hackbarth says his own daughter, who has autism, has thrived with the help of ESA-funded private tutors, therapy, and even piano lessons. Her piano was a hand-me-down, but Hackbarth knows of other ESA parents who are buying new pianos for their living rooms with taxpayer dollars.
Some of the stuff I heard during meetings, I was shocked, that there was no oversight in the past.
Arizona ESA Director John Ward tells ABC15 families choosing private schools or home education this year can receive at least $7,300 per child. A portion must be spent on academics, but the rest can go for other educational purposes.
A family would have to submit a curriculum showing what they're teaching.
Approved expenses for last year included more than $800,000 for horseback riding, trips to zoos in 8 states, and about 3,000 transactions at indoor trampoline parks, according to state data analyzed by ABC15.
The vast majority of purchases that are coming through are completely allowable in terms of what the law says is allowable.
Does there need to be a serious look this legislative session and maybe a rewriting of some of this legislation?
I think so. I think they need to look at what they're doing, what the staff is doing right now to correct all the mistakes. I don't think our legislature on both sides of the aisle really looked at how it was written when we decided to expand.
Hackbarth advocating for 2 kinds of changes, putting more caps on how students can use taxpayer money and finding a way to measure academic success.
We need to make sure that we have everything in place that it would be if it's like at a public school. We need to have something in place. Otherwise it could fail.
Arizona House leaders have formed an ad hoc committee on ESA governance and oversight. They held their first hearing a couple of weeks ago. I'm investigator Melissa Blasius, ABC 15, Arizona.
ABC 15 reached out to Republican State House Speaker Ben Toma's office for comment today, and we were told that he was unavailable and out of state. We did catch up with Governor Hobbs at an event this morning. ABC 15 investigator Melissa Blasius asked her about the millions of dollars ESA parents are spending on non-academics for their kids.
In educational extras like taxpayer money paying for more than $1 million in martial arts lessons, $1 million in private swim lessons, a $10,000 sewing machine, etc.
A $10,000 sewing machine? Okay, sorry.
Really, these were approved transactions by the ESA program. What are you willing to do to take a harder look at exactly where taxpayer money is going and have some more accountability in that?
I mean, I think I've been calling for this from day one, not just from day one in the governor's office, but since we started enacting ESAs back in 2011 when I was a brand new legislator. One of the biggest criticisms is that the program is unaccountable and there's not enough measures to protect taxpayers and make sure that their dollars are being spent on appropriate expenses. So there needs to be guardrails, there needs to be more accountability.
Governor Hobbs says looking at the upcoming legislative session, every idea is on the table. Back to our continuing coverage of Arizona's Universal School Voucher Program. 1 year after that program was put in place, ABC 15 is providing you the most in-depth look at how $304 million in Empowerment Scholarship account money was spent. Here's ABC 15 data analyst Garrett Archer with the biggest recipients by school and in non-academic extras funded by your tax dollars.
In our look at ESA data, we found $91 million, nearly a third of all spending last year, went to schools specializing in kids with disabilities. This leaves about $109 million in ESA awards spent at about 400 private and religious schools across the state. The average amount received by a school was about $269,000, with the median amount being $96,000. That gap means that there are a smaller number of schools receiving more money, which would be expected as some schools are larger than others. And here are the private and parochial schools receiving the most. The first three are Christian school groups with multiple campuses. Gilbert Christian Schools tops the list at $4.6 million, followed by Northwest Christian Schools and Valley Christian Schools. St. Thomas the Apostle in Phoenix is the Catholic K-8 school with the most amount of ESA funds, $2.3 million, and Brightmont Academy, the only non-Christian school on the list, received $2.3 million in ESA dollars. We also wanted to take you through some of the non-academic extras that families are spending their ESA money on. In total, this was about $11 million, or about 4% of spending. $3 million went to various sports programs, $2 million to music lessons and equipment, and $1.2 million went to martial arts studios. Visual and performing arts programs received about $1 million, followed by equine therapy and horseback riding, and finally gardening and supplies. We also broke down that $3 million spent on sports. A little under $1 million went to private swimming lessons. About $800,000 went to gymnastics programs. A big drop off from there. Under $200,000 of ESA dollars went to trampoline and climbing parks, respectively. In the music and arts categories, about $1 million was spent on music lessons, and about $500,000 were spent on dance studios. With a look inside the ESA numbers, I'm Garrett Archer, ABC 15, Arizona.
In the state of education, new numbers out tonight show enrollment in Arizona's Universal School Voucher Program at well over 68,000 kids. What's more, that's more than what was expected this year. Governor Katie Hobbs says that will put the Empowerment Scholarship Account program over its $624 million budget. She calls the program wasteful, in part based on what ABC 15 senior investigative reporter Melissa Blasius uncovered.
Governor Katie Hobbs taking notice, now calling the voucher program unaccountable and unsustainable. This coming just days after ABC 15's big investigation into how hundreds of millions of dollars in ESA money is being spent. ESAs provide funding to families that opt out of the public school system and instead enroll their kids in private schools or home educate them. The governor citing our findings, questioning how some families are using their education money on ski passes, luxury car driving lessons, and pianos. She says the over-budget voucher program threatens funding for public safety, vulnerable children, and veterans. Tuesday, she called on the state superintendent, state House Speaker, and Senate President to, quote, join with bipartisan leaders to pass accountability measures and bring an end to this wasteful runaway spending. We again Tuesday evening tried to reach out to State House Speaker Ben Toma for his take on how this money's being spent, but we have not heard back. I'm investigator Melissa Blasius, ABC 15, Arizona.
Our reporting is now leading to a growing political debate on Arizona's education budget. New tonight, the state superintendent is talking about compromise to ABC 15 senior investigative reporter Melissa Blasius.
It's grip strength, learning movement and dynamics with like shoulder movements, learning how to kind of throw.
Robert Munoz manages this Ninja Warrior gym in Gilbert, advertising specials for families who want to spend their empowerment scholarship accounts. This is an approved vendor for the Universal School Voucher Program.
A lot of the ESA parents that come in, they use this as like their PE time for their kids to help get them out, get them active for a different sport that they're not used to.
He says ESA makes up 10 to 15% of the gym's business.
A lot of those expenditures just made me so angry.
Democratic State Representative Nancy Gutierrez, who's also a teacher, looked at ABC 15's analysis of educational extras that some ESA families are buying, like $400,000 on aeroponic indoor gardens and supplies.
We do have a garden at Tucson High, and teachers and students have to go and ask for money in the private sector to get money to fund our garden. And yet I saw that there were thousands being spent on these special gardening, kits.
Democratic legislators now saying the ESA program's already $40 million over budget in a year where new estimates predict a $400 million state budget shortfall. But State Superintendent Tom Horn, a Republican, says his department's calculations show something different.
The data shows that the total K-12 budget, including public schools and ESAs, is some $75 million below budget.
His staff reviews all requests for ESA reimbursement.
The philosophy that I've imposed is every dollar for a valid educational purpose.
Most of the money pays for private or parochial school tuition.
So I think it would have to be reasonable, but it may be an amendment is needed to the legislation, and I'm all for that, for any amendment that might be needed. And as I said earlier, I'm happy to work with the governor in trying to find compromises.
Representative Gutierrez is skeptical about talk of compromise.
There were several ESA voucher bills last year, and none of them were heard on committee. I don't have a lot of hope that the Republicans will hear any of them on any committee again.
She says her school can't find the money for basics.
We have school classrooms that still have asbestos, but they're shut off because we don't even have the money to abate that asbestos.
While taxpayer dollars are redirected to places like this Ninja Gym.
It gives the kids a more diverse outlet to go try a bunch of new things.
I'm investigator Melissa Blasius, ABC 15, Arizona.